Great. Well, welcome everyone to another webinar in the series presented by NMD4C. This is probably a little bit of a departure from some of the other webinar series in that today we're going to focus on a research infrastructure tool and sort of walk you through this partnership that we have with CTSR. Again, before I introduce my co-speakers for the event, I obviously want to acknowledge our funding partnerships and funding agencies, particularly with Muscular Dystrophy Canada and CIHR for the NMD4C network. We are during this webinar, because it's a little bit more of a hopefully an interactive thing, I will keep my eye on the chat as we go. I think we'll have lots of time for discussion. So if you feel comfortable, please feel free to put something in the chat or the Q&A. And my co-speakers here have agreed that it would be okay if we interject with questions as we go too. Of course, we will leave some time for discussion at the end as well. By way of introductions, my name is Craig Campbell. I'm a pediatric neuromuscular specialist in London and the interim chair chief of pediatrics here, and the part of the working group that's involved in clinical trial optimization and networking as part of the NMD4C. And it's in that role that we come to you with this talk today. Also, welcome Sunil Roger. Sunil's a researcher at the Center for Clinical Trials at the University Medical Center in Freiburg, Germany, and is part of the team responsible for developing and maintaining the CTSR. His academic background encompasses social sciences and human-computer interaction, and he will shortly submit his PhD thesis based on work conducted with powered wheelchair users and their experiences of mobility and access in transport and public space. So good luck with that, Sunil. Previously, he's worked in the Treat NMD Coordination Office at Newcastle University, where I've worked with him in that role in the past as well, where he was a communications officer, and for the EU-funded CARE NMD project to implement consensus care standards in DMD. So we're very lucky to have Sunil with us to walk us through the CTSR. The other person that we're going to speak to today is Bonnie Wooten. Bonnie is the, has several roles here in London in partnership with me. But the one that's most relevant to her work for this webinar is as the clinical trial concierge and as one of the leads for, again, for the work package within NMD4C that has to do with clinical trial optimization in Canada. And hopefully many of you will have already met Bonnie and worked with her in her various projects, and developing a clinical trial site asset map, which was part of the work project, has been something that Bonnie's been spearheading in her role with NMD4C. So we'll all be delivering little parts of this. Bonnie, if you can move on to the next slide. But I'll start just to lay the context a little bit. Again, many of you will probably be aware, if you're NMD4C members, that one of the main work packages that were put together as part of NMD4C was this work package that was really looking at optimizing and facilitating and coordinating clinical trial experiences for all stakeholders in Canada in the neuromuscular space. And that work has had a number of activities, including things like closer relationships with the Canadian Neuromuscular Disease Registry and optimizing interactions there to facilitate clinical trials, things like developing a training program and mentorship program for investigators who are wanting to become more familiar with running industry and academic-based clinical trials at their site. Other objectives include attracting more clinical trial sites to Canada and showcasing our abilities to really function well in all phases of clinical trial phases here in Canada, and then really finally coordinating better for all the stakeholders in the neuromuscular disease space, the pathways and interactions and access to clinical trials. And so really, as part of that last bit of work is really what has driven the partnership with CTSR, because we felt that part of coordination and optimizing clinical trials meant having an asset map of clinical trial sites in Canada that could be easily accessed, that we could showcase for potential sponsors, that we could pull some metrics out of in terms of clinical activity, in clinical trial activity in Canada. And of course, we all appreciate some of these logistical challenges to clinical trials in rare disease, which a clinical trial site registry becomes an important tool to facilitate, including having small numbers of patients, varied resource and experience across a large geography country like Canada with a relatively small population, the ability to quickly identify appropriate sites for clinical trials, and ultimately to reduce the burden on clinical sites and industry researchers. So we have these kind of assets quickly available at our fingertips, so we can show people. And so it was with this in mind that we looked at, how could we best develop a clinical trial site registry, and we became aware of the work of the Care and Trial Site Registry. In fact, there are already, as Sunil may mention, several Canadian sites who have signed up in the CTSR. But as Sunil is going to show you today, there's been significant investment and in the CTSR of late. And this seemed to us to be a good natural partner for having our Canadian assets in this registry. So not only would we be able to facilitate understanding our clinical trial site activity here in Canada, but could tie into a more global effort. So with that, I will now turn it over to Sunil for the probably the bulk of the talk, actually, to help you understand and see this important tool, CTSR. Thanks, Sunil, for being with us.
Thank you very much, Craig. Thank you everyone for joining us. It's early evening here in the UK. I'm just in the UK at the moment. I know it's lunchtime for you guys, so thank you for taking time from your lunch. And as Craig and Bonnie have sort of highlighted, my role today is just to give you a little bit more information about the CTSR itself. And so I'm going to take the next sort of 10 or 15 minutes just to walk you through the CTSR. I apologize in advance if anyone is already very well acquainted with the CTSR, but hopefully I will still be able to contribute something to your understanding. So the CTSR, or or Care and Trial Site Registry. It began as an attempt to try and address some of the challenges, the logistical challenges that Craig has already outlined and discussed in the previous slide. And it began as part of the Treat NMD Neuromuscular Network, which was a European-funded project, a European Network of Excellence, that was established originally in 2007 and lasted through to 2012, and has since become a self-sustaining network. And it's a feasibility database containing site-level information about neuromuscular trial sites. And although it began initially as focusing primarily on trial sites, it has expanded to include all neuromuscular sites. And not just neuromuscular sites, in fact, it's been extended to sites seeing neurodegenerative diseases as part of the Neuromics project between 2012 and 2017. And it is a resource that has been recommended by the International Rare Diseases Research Consortium, IRDIC. So it has quite a lot of utility. And it's one of many different infrastructures and tools that aims to accelerate clinical trial readiness. And so I'd like to next go on, next slide, please, Bunny, to just talk a little bit about, well, what do I mean by a feasibility database? So at its simplest, that is the information that is useful in determining whether a planned clinical trial is feasible. And that includes information about a hospital or another site that sees patients with neuromuscular conditions. So that would include things such as the contact information, aggregate data about patient populations. So in the case of the CTSR, there are more than 40 individual conditions, which are subdivided by age groups. Diagnostic tools that are available at that site, information about the personnel and experience that they have in clinical trials, information about the equipment and the care settings, as well as information about to what extent a site participates in national or international networking or research and education. Next slide, please. I'd like to just take a moment to explicitly highlight some of the differences between site-level data that the CTSR holds and patient registry data. We very much see these as complementary information, not as competing with each other. Patient registries obviously hold individual level data on patients. They hold exact information about patients, and with the appropriate consents and with the appropriate intermediaries, such as registry curators, they can allow for direct contact with individual patients. And that includes things like, for example, particular genetic mutations. It might also include things such as longitudinal data from clinic visits. And depending on the setup of an individual patient registry, that data is entered either by sites or by patients themselves, or by a combination of both. The CTSR is very much focused on center level data. So it's a database of neuromuscular centers. As I said, that's now expanded to include neurodegenerative diseases as well. And we only collect the aggregate number of patients in given age groups by diseases. We don't hold individual patient level data. And the data is entered by the sites themselves. Next slide, please, Bonnie.
Thank you.
So this is just a brief overview of the growth of the CTSR since it was created. It's gone from about 125 sites to about 383 sites at the present day. So that just gives you an indication. And as you can see, since sort of 2014, 15, there's been an increasing number of sites seeing neurodegenerative conditions as well. It's worth pointing out, actually, that in many cases, some centers or some sites will see both neuromuscular and neurodegenerative conditions. So you can see the relevant overlap. That's next slide, please. Thank you. This is just to give you a brief idea of the geographical spread of sites. You can see that there's a predominant number in Europe and North America. And that partly stems from the origin of the CTSR in a European network. I would caution that this and one or two of the other maps in particular are slightly out of date. And if you're wondering what the red dot in the middle of the Indian Ocean is, that's actually a site in Reunion. So there are sites all over the world, and that's one of the things that we'd like to encourage, is to involve more sites. Next slide, please. To give you an approximate indication of the number of patients that are seen at sites in the CTSR, this is the patient population from a couple of months ago. We're looking at around about 19,000 patients living with Duchenne, around about 5,700 with Becker and other neuromuscular conditions in roughly the proportions you see there. Next slide, please. So one of the questions that people would say is, well, why should I register my site in the CTSR? And as we see it, there are a range of benefits for registering as a site. And I'm going to start with those that are benefits for the sites themselves. So the first is that we, certainly when the CTSR is set up, and I know that this still happens, a lot of sites will receive from industry or from CROs questionnaires, quite detailed questionnaires, as these organizations, as companies try to determine the suitability of particular planned clinical trials and try to identify sites. And so quite a lot of time was being spent from individual sites typing up or responding to these questionnaires and saying, yes, well, we have approximately this number of patients with Duchenne, we have a -80-degree freezer, and so on and so forth. And this was chewing up quite a lot of time and very repetitive. So one of the advantages of the CTSR is that it's a single location where sites can store and update their information that then industry can then query. So the idea is that this will reduce some of the overhead on sites themselves. As part of that, it also helps to raise the site's profile. One of the things, again, is that the big sites, certainly in Europe and the UK, I'm a little less familiar with Canada, particularly when new pharmaceutical companies entered the rare disease space and entered the neuromuscular space, they would know one or two sites already, the most famous ones, perhaps the largest ones, and they would try to identify other potential trial sites by attending conferences and so on. But that's a very uneven process and very haphazard. And it sometimes meant that really good sites were just slipping under the radar somewhat. So the idea of being in the CTSR is that it helps to raise a site's profile as well. And combined, the hope is that this increases the likelihood of sites participating in trials and research. Flipping it on its head slightly for industry and researchers, obviously the flip side of what I've already said is that it's a centralized source of site level information. And it's important to note that these organizations do sometimes still then follow up on a query to the CTSR, but it allows them to have a quick turnaround for initial feasibility inquiries and to understand site level data across multiple sites relatively quickly. Next slide, please. To give you an indication of the utility of the CTSR, it's been used in 61 inquiries since 2009. 35 of those were from industry, with the remainder being from either individual academics or patient organizations. 18 of those queries have been in the last 5 years. It varies, but there are typically between 2 and 5 queries per year. So 2 to 5 inquiries come in. And it's worth also noting that academic and patient organization inquiries are free. And from industry, it's done on a cost recovery basis. So the idea is trying to accelerate bench to bedside research, and we're trying to do that to make trials as feasible as possible. So one other thing to bear in mind is that although the CTSR began as part of the Treat NMD network and has since grown to work with many other partners, and although it is independent, it is still possible to request a joint inquiry to both the CTSR and the Treat NMD patient registries, and we still work closely with Treat NMD. So the images on the right of this slide demonstrate the utility of this in terms of planning clinical trials. So the top image shows the approximate geographic locations of patients with Duchenne in Germany, Switzerland, and Austria. And you can see that there's a pretty wide range of blue dots there. So that's patient registry level information. In the same image, you can see the yellow pins, which represent sites in the CTSR at the time of that particular inquiry. The lower image shows those patients with a particular skippable exon alongside those sites. And you can see that some sites are closely clustered with particular patients. And that is the kind of information which is then useful for feasibility planning of clinical trials. So industry can request a joint report from the CTSR and from TreatNMD that would contain this kind of level of information. The images are actually from a 2013 paper, which sets out the background and development of the CTSR. So these are quite out of date images, I'm afraid. But we are planning an updated publication, or actually several updated publications over the next year or two. Next slide, please. So that's inquiries in relation to feasibility and trial inquiries. The CTSR also has quite a lot of use in other initiatives. And this is because site level data can be helpful in a range of different contexts. And again, it comes back to the distinction between site and patient level data. So for example, we can set up specific questionnaires or forms that are restricted to sites in particular countries or particular networks or particular projects. So for example, these can be used for surveys or audits to assess care standards. And we've done that in the past with Muscular Dystrophy UK, with Action Duchenne. And they can also be used to identify potential partners for projects or to collect data for specific projects. And briefly, 3 examples. MyoSeq is a whole exome sequencing project for patients with undiagnosed limb girdle weakness. And the CTSR was used as part of the work to identify sites there. Vision DMD is a global phase 2 trial of VVP15. It's a steroid-like intervention. And again, the CTSR was used to identify potential sites. And within the European context, there are, I think, 29 European reference networks for rare diseases, which are virtual networks of healthcare providers, which are aimed to facilitate access, no matter where you are in Europe, to appropriate expertise and care for a whole raft of rare diseases. And the European Reference Network for Rare Neuromuscular Diseases, EuroNMD, uses the CTSR to store site-level data about the sites. Next slide, please. And that is a somewhat out of date, again, I apologize, map of the European Reference Network sites for EuroNMD. The less said about Brexit, the better, unfortunately. Next slide, please. So where next? We have a number of priorities at the moment, which are on our radar for the next sort of 6 to 9 months. The first of these is updating the technical platform that CTSR is built on. It's a 12-year-old database that has been expanded over time, and like any IT project, has accumulated a certain amount of cruft. And there are things that we can do better now than we could in 2009. So this offers the opportunity to develop additional functionality. And that includes collaborating with networks such as EuroNMD that I've already mentioned to include either site-level data attributes that they need or other requested features. And that also applies to the collaboration with NMD4C. And I would very much love to hear from anyone on the call or via the network itself to identify the kind of things that you would feel you would need, either as sites or as a network, because it's much easier to work with you as users of the CTSR to identify and implement what you need as we redevelop the CTSR. Another major area at the moment is the verification of metadata to enable reuse. This is part of a wider initiative towards enabling automatic reuse of data by computers and not only humans. So that includes things like defining terms. So we say DMD or Duchenne, that can be defined in terms of an ontology. It's worth noting at this point, this doesn't mean making all data publicly available, but it's more about enabling, for example, someone to say, I'm interested in finding sites that meet certain criteria and being able to do that programmatically, potentially. So that's something that we're working on as part of European projects as well. And the third major area that I'm involved with at the moment is ensuring that the data is up to date and ensuring that it is of high quality for the longer term. Now, it's worth noting also, data tends not to change regularly once a site is registered. If your site has a -80 degrees freezer, you tend to still have a -80 degree freezer a couple of years later. And actually, even patient numbers generally tend to stay relatively static. New patients are diagnosed, and sometimes, unfortunately, patients pass away. However, there are always room for improvements, and we'd like to make it easier to ensure sites are able to keep their data up to date and to be able to verify and say, okay, yes, we have confidence that all of the data that we are giving is within, for example, the last 3 months or the last 6 months. And with that, I'd like to pass back over to Craig, who will talk a little bit more about the joint collaboration between CTSR and NMB4C.
Great, thanks so much, Sunil. I'm just going to pause there for a minute before we move on to the next step, just to see if there is actually sort of any specific questions for Sunil. I mean, there was one request for the transcript, which I suspect this is being recorded, but any questions specifically for Sunil on the tool itself and its history? No, okay. So the next slides, we're going to talk, Bonnie and I'll share a little bit as we go through, but maybe I'll start here with the so why did we, what led us to the collaboration, the partnership here? I mean, I think it's quite obvious from Sunil's talk that the CTSR really matched up against some of the objectives we had when we started to think about clinical trial optimization and developing an asset of clinical trial sites on which we could build a whole bunch of information, much of which Sunil's touched on, and so the real attraction of the partnership came from having a well-established clinical trial site registry that was already quite functional, that was quite well partnered, well networked, and had gone through all the trials of launching and building in the neuromuscular community. So that was a very attractive link for us. The other thing, of course, was the comprehensiveness, and you've heard from Sunil the scope of the CTSR, so some of the vision going forward. The embracing fair data principles, really important in the next wave of data stewardship. So all these things were really really important for us to link with. So rather than sort of inventing something and building something up on our own, we've decided to operationalize this partnership. I think I've put some points up here that CTSR is obviously a helpful resource, as I've said. We do have relationships and clinical trial sites in our network, but this will really allow us to build on those existing knowledge of sites in a more formal and structured way. The CTSR, as Sunil mentioned, has agreed to help build in some new features to support NMB4C, and so that can include Canada-specific questions or content in the registry, and it will enable NMD4C clinical trial concierge, so Bonnie's role, to have an administrative function with CTSR. So that means Bonnie can actually sort of help to your site to to get launched in the CTSR, and can also be able to pull some data ideally from sites to help with clinical trial planning. All that will be done with your consent and partnership. So please know we that there will be agreement around how much administrative activity will happen there. But ultimately, we really promote Canada as a viable location for clinical trials. And as you all are probably aware, when industry or other academic partners are looking around for where to run their trials, they're looking for these kind of tools and systems to be in place to mitigate any risk. And there is, clearly very tangible benefits to have something like the CTSR populated with lots of Canadian sites. But there's also an intangible benefit to this, as there are to patient registries, for industry to look at a country and say, this country has, is really well organized, they're clearly collaborative, they're clearly system thinking type of folks. And that really does a lot to kind of smooth out the landscape for sponsors. The other thing I want to mention on this slide is that we also have, just so people are aware, the Canadian neuromuscular community and our registry, the CNDR, have been long partnered with TreatNMD. In fact, our own Jim Dowling is the current chair of TreatNMD, and I've just come off being chair of the registry committee of TreatNMD for the last few years. And so our registry does have a long history of cooperation with TreatNMD as a global organization, which by extension has a partnership with CTSR that has been an important part of the attraction for inquiries into both registries, patient registry and clinical trial site registry, over the years, as Sunil pointed out. So there's lots of synergies already there. There's lots of relationships already established there. So Bonnie, maybe I'll hand over to you for the next parts here.
Thank you, and welcome everyone. I'm very pleased to be able to offer some information about the concierge role. Craig has highlighted a bit of that. We're going to do a little more specific, give you more specific information of the benefits of working with the concierge. So the concierge can act as a clinical resource to sponsors and industry in broadening the clinical trial landscape across Canadian sites. If you're doing feasibility studies and you're looking at where would be the best spot to, where are the resources located, who could do this particular trial, there's where I can assist you through the CTSR. And that's why we're trying to recruit all our members to be part of CTSR, so that I can assist you in your trials and the sponsors in industry. And I can also coordinate information exchange between trial sites across Canada by ensuring that some sites do not become overcommitted while others have underused capacity. And we know there's many sites that are trying to get started and get up and running and may have the appropriate resources and be able to take on a particular trial. This would be a great advantage to our families across Canada to have sites that are well spread out. I think that was discussed, I can assist you with registration, and some of the next slides, Craig and I will go through the registration with you. It's fairly straightforward, probably easy for me to say because I've been working with it, but I can assist you with the registration. I can support the sites by updating the site data as directed by the site. Again, I do not do anything with your site without your permission. and assisting with registrations and add secondary users. Sometimes the site wants a secondary person to be the contact, and we can make that happen. The use of the CTSR database by the concierge requires the consent of the Canadian sites. And we did send out some information with the MOU and a consent to all our 35 sites, and we got a fairly good response back. We were able to attract new members to sign up with the CTSR, which is fabulous. And what the consent talks about is you deciding what level of responsibility you would like the concierge to have, whether it's you'd like the concierge to actually go in and look at your data, or if you'd like some help in going in and setting up, working with you to set up your data, or just being documented by documenting, making sure it's up to date. So there are about 3 levels of that permission, and of course you can decline permission of the concierge. Being a member is probably very key. So it would all be documented by a signed letter, a receipt of an agreed signed letter, which comes in the package. And if you don't recall that package, please feel free to be in touch with me, and I'll be more than happy to send the package out to you again for consideration. Now, this is the CTSR registering site. I know it's small print, and I know that Dr. Campbell, you've had lots of experience here, and you want to talk about the ease of coming to this site. It is when you set up the link, this is what will appear.
Yeah, do you want me to go ahead, Bud? Yeah, so I mean, yeah, you know, it's like any registration site. It's pretty straightforward. I mean, this won't take long. We can walk through this. You can, on this landing page for CTSR, which we can, well, as Bonnie says, we've distributed to many of the members, but we can also send that out again. You can sign up for a new account, and if you, so and that'll walk you through the process. Or if you're already a registered site, you can look through and see, so there's a box here that you can choose your country and check if you're already registered. Because the CTSR has been around for a number of years, it may be that you've previously registered, or a research coordinator or project manager that you had previously registered your site. So you can go in and check that. And I think on the next slide we do have
I just wanted to mention one thing, though, Craig, is that when you go in, you may see in your site, in your area, that there are 2 locations, and that could be possible. You just have to look at, identify your site as being different from the other site that's there. There may be 2 sites. I think, Sunil, we had that issue, didn't we?
Yeah, that's a great thought, Bonnie, for sure. Because you might have the, some might be in an academic health science center where there's a pediatric site or an adult site. It also allows you to register, kind of as a site, even if, I mean, hopefully there's not the case, but if there's, 2 neuromuscular investigators at a site who really function quite separately and are, don't share a lot of, you could register, in that way as well. So it doesn't necessarily absolutely force you to incorporate or get everyone on the same page at what can be large academic health science centers. So, and
here you can see the list of locations that, and as we were just chatting about, if there's 2, there could be 2 in your area.
Yeah, so
just briefly,
go ahead.
To flag that up, one of the more common use cases for that is if there is a pediatric and an adult center in the same hospital, they may well have separate clinics. The CTSR itself is very flexible, and we do not mandate what a site looks like, because that often varies quite dramatically between different health systems in different countries. So this is very much a case of what works best for you guys. The thing to do is to make sure that you're not accidentally signing up for a new account for your own clinic that someone has already done. That's the only thing we ask you to check.
Yeah, great. And then you'll be guided, you know, through, you know, a few web pages. Obviously, there's a, you know, a personal details and agreement type, and then you get into the disease groups in which you know, want to profile your ability to work as a clinical trial site. That's the other thing. You know, you don't need to necessarily put every patient population. If you feel, you know, more confident that you're a Duchenne muscular dystrophy person or SMA, or you, and correct me, Sunil, if I'm wrong, but as I've gone to, you can put multiple patient populations in as well. So it really, again, is flexible for your, how you want to run your site. And then if you just keep going, Bonnie, yeah, so once you get into the patient population, as Sunil pointed out, I think there was a show of this or a description of this, you then can, you know, sort of expand a little bit on your patient population in terms of the age and stage of the disease. And this will, you know, walk you all through it. You just click on the boxes, you populate it. And
this is very helpful when talking to sponsors in industry, right? To have this information. So this is very key to populating this.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So
one other
point
on that, if I may, Craig and Bonnie,
please.
It's far more useful to have an approximate number. I don't think any sponsor or us, certainly not us, would expect you to be updating this every time a new patient comes to your clinic and every time the numbers vary by one. It's very much a case of approximately in each age group, how many patients are there to the nearest 5 or so would probably be the most sensible way to do this. And that's, so don't feel obligated to sort of every time someone changes an age group, go in and update the data. That's far too much overhead, and it's far too granular for that. This is just to give a rough idea for sponsors.
Good point. Thanks, Sunil. There was one on equipment.
Yeah, great. Yeah, and again, so you can, you know, you have the profile of your disease population, and then there's also, you know, sort of a profile of the equipment and the capacity for clinical trial, you know, work. So equipment that you have, experience in, you know, in clinical trials. So you know, again, I mean, I'd encourage everyone to go on and you know, register and start to work with this. And then, you know, as Bonnie's mentioned, she's happy to, you know, help facilitate this a little bit.
Sure. I can help navigate, Craig, if they need some help on that. So.
Yeah, although I do think you'll find it fairly
easy.
yeah, user-friendly
I agree.
process. So I think that's our last slide, and I just wanted to leave a little bit of time for discussion and questions. And I have one right off the top, Sunil. If I don't see, we'll let people queue up here. But one of the things that was, I mean, I've been in the CTSR for many, many years, our site. One of the things we used to get queued on when there was an inquiry, we would get queued that there was a new inquiry and give us a chance to update our data. Is that still part of the functionality or planned functionality, or?
Yes, absolutely. So when there is an inquiry, that comes into the team in Freiburg, and at the moment that tends to come to me. And what I will do is I will send an email to all registered sites, asking them, well, in fact, what I try to do is send an email to all sites, informing them that there is a potential inquiry at the very, very earliest stage to give people as much time as possible. Okay. Once an inquiry is confirmed, then I would send another email and say that an inquiry, and we try to give sites an indication of what is being asked for as well. You know, it's not update all of your data, although it's always good if sites can update their data. But for example, we have a sponsor who is interested in information about Duchenne care and core site facilities, please could you update that? And we try to ensure that you have at least 4 weeks to update your data before the date that we then skim the data off and prepare an aggregate report for the sponsor. Sometimes that timeline is elongated. Quite often the paperwork with contracts can take some time, but we try to give you at least 4 weeks notice.
Great, thank you. In a minute, I'm going to get Homira to say the question she's got here, but there is one in the chat, and I may just ask this. It says, is the registration needed for sites that index in Treat NMD? And I'm not sure exactly what this is getting at, but I'll take a stab just, and if you want to turn, I mean, we're a small enough group that if you want to turn on your thing and clarify, but again, Treat NMD membership, Treat NMD registry involvement through the CNDR is parallel and separate from CTSR. We have a long history of working together to provide the kind of data that Sunil talked about of where are sites, where are patients. But you don't need either to be a member of Treat NMD to participate in CTSR or vice versa. And of course, although we'd love everyone as a member of NMD4C, you can actually access CTSR and put your data, like register your site without even without membership in NMD4C actually. So it is a public facing website that you can access. So I hope I answered that. Homira, do you have a couple of questions?
Yes, I do. One question was asking for clarification. So one question was saying, can you clarify between the role between CTSR and CNDR?
Right. Yes, I can do that. So again, CNDR is a patient registry. So many of our sites in NMD4C contribute to the CNDR and are putting in patient information into the CNDR. CNDR has a relationship with Treat NMD, the global registry consortium. It's called TGDoc, and TGDoc has about 36, well, I mean, they have different, but let's take the example of DMD. They have 36 DMD registries that feed in from around the world into Treat NMD. But CNDR is a patient registry. The CTSR is a clinical trial site registry. So it's about your site. And while it has data in it about the numbers of patients and the characteristics, those are put in by the investigator based on, I mean, maybe you do have a registry that you say, oh, I'll put in exact numbers. Maybe it's estimates, but it's about your site, not, not so much about individual patient or aggregate patient data. I hope that explains the difference. You can see why they're complementary.
That's great, Craig. The next question here is for Sunil. From your European experience, do you find that as a result of the CTSR, some of the clinical trial sites that are most commonly picked versus less commonly picked, there's change in patterns once they have registered and provide more comprehensive data in their profile? Have you seen any changes as a result of that?
I think it's hard to be absolutely confident that is the case. In the sense that sponsors will approach sites directly. They will approach PIs, they will ask around as well. And we cannot be absolutely 100% confident that if a site's information is passed as part of a response to a CTSR inquiry to a potential sponsor, that then that subsequent contact between that site and the sponsor has been prompted by the fact that they were in the CTSR inquiry. Very sort of, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to make a comment on that because you bring up an important point. The one thing we just should be very clear on: participating in the CTSR does not prevent you from talking to any collaborator, industry sponsor, nothing like that. So the agreement does not say, oh, you know, people can only talk to you or access your site information through the CTSR. You're obviously still completely able to function in, you know, if a sponsor calls you up, you can absolutely talk to them, and you don't have any limitations, let's say, by participating. It's just another avenue. And as most of you know, many sponsors, they will, I mean, it goes back to what I was saying about mitigating risk for people. You know, sponsors who are looking to launch an industry trial, they'll contact you, they'll phone you, they'll have their CRO phone you, they'll check clinical trial site registries, so that the more, you know, comprehensive your presence is in these areas, the more chance you'll have some interaction with industry and academic partners.
Yeah, I would concur with that. Thanks, Craig. So while it is not possible to be absolutely definitive and say, yes, this CTSR inquiry from company X led to my participation, or the participation of this site in a subsequent trial, we've certainly got that impression quite strongly informally from things that have been said. But it's impossible to absolutely prove it, because, you know, there is nothing to stop any given site collaborating directly with a potential sponsor. It's very much about increasing visibility.
And I would
trying
say,
to measure that is very hard.
And I would say that I have the same impression as the past, you know, chair of TG Doc and running, you know, the global registry part of this, you know, partnership. I would have the same impression that it's very valuable to industry, and many choose the option of inquiring from both registries when they approach us. Homer, did you have any other question, or?
No, all good, but the floor is open. If anyone has any questions, they can put in the Q&A or in the chat box. We'd be welcome to take any questions. And as mentioned, this recording will be available, as we have seen some individuals would like to watch it afterwards, and we did have some industry partners on the line as well.
Maybe one question I'll, you know, just sort of, or one comment that I'll, you know, throw out there as well. I'm sure people are aware that there are clinical trial site maps or asset maps in Canada and in Ontario. Part of CT Clinical Trials Ontario has one, but one of the real attractions, obviously, to CTSR is this, you know, is this specificity for neuromuscular work. And you know, and the links in the neuromuscular and neurodegenerative world. So, but again, I just wanted to say it doesn't preclude you from putting your site also in some of these other asset maps, you know, if you wish. So, and let me ask Bonnie maybe one question. Bonnie, what's the? I know you have you have a email. People can reach you through the NMD4C website, but how, you know, how do you want people to reach out to you to get, you know, to help get settled into the CTSR?
Certainly, right through the website you just talked about, the MND4C website, going there and you'll see my my contact address on clinicaltrials.com, not clinicaltrials.com. Sorry, I've been on there all morning. Clinical trials at LHSC. I am based in London, as Dr. Campbell mentioned at the beginning. It is my home base, so I do have an LHSC address, but going to the website is probably best, because you will get all the information about my role and some of the trials that I'm already supporting and providing a coordination to, that might be helpful for people to see and have knowledge of.
Thanks, Bonnie. And I just want to acknowledge this comment that has come through. I think, you know, I mean, partly to say you're welcome, but also, you know, I do truly, over my 17 years and in this field, I do, it is very clear that, you know, being organized, being collaborative, showing your assets, understanding them is really, you know, is really a huge mitigating factor for companies running clinical trials. And I will say that, you know, Canada is now one of the, you know, well sought after places to run clinical trials, despite having a small, you know, relatively small patient population, because of the standards of care we've developed with organizations like NMD4C, because of our registry, because of our collaboration. And so, you know, this is, I know you're thanking us, but this is on the whole neuromuscular community. We are lucky in Canada to have such strong collaborators, such strong patient organizations, and such forward thinkers, and such great international partners like Sunil and the CTSR. So that's probably a good thing to wrap, a good note to wrap up on, probably, Homera.
That's excellent. We will follow up with an evaluation form and, of course, the link to today's recording. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.